keyboard. Okay, maybe that's an exaggeration, but you get my point. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your Wi-Fi routers, because here comes Professor Ron Deibert, the director of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto. And one last thing. If you've got anything to hide, he's probably already found it. And if he hasn't, he's just being nice. Ron.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That's hilarious. Well, let me say, first of all, thank you, Sheila. Thank you, David, for the invitation. I'm so overwhelmed and honored to be here with you all. I don't think I've ever said this publicly. Slightly embarrassing disclosure I'm about to make. It was my dream as a high school student to be an investigative journalist. I was so passionate about it. I wrote for my high school newspaper, and so when I finished high school and graduated, of course, I applied to the journalism school in my local college at Vancouver, Canada, and I was rejected. So I was hacked with Pegasus. Al Jazeera. We worked with the IT team at Al Jazeera and found out that more than 36 journalists, producers, and anchors all had their phones hacked with Pegasus, including many of the producers and journalists' personal phones. Now, you may carry around separate devices for your work and your private lives, but that's not going to stop the spies who can very readily find out that you have those two devices, and they're going to go after your personal phone. Another example from El Salvador, El Faro. Working with partners there, we discovered 35 victims of independent media organizations and journalists. All had their phones hacked with Pegasus spyware. Carlos Data is here somewhere. He's going to be on the panel soon, and he can tell us more about that experience. Here's Ben Hubbard, the New York Times chief Middle East correspondent, who was covering, among other things, the execution of his colleague Jamal Khashoggi and writing a book on Mohammed bin Salman. When we wrote a report in 2018 showing that one of Jamal's closest friends, a Canadian, Omar Abdul Aziz, had his phone hacked with Pegasus, Ben reached out and said, you know, I saw the text message that Omar received that you guys published. I received a very similar text message. So we analyzed his phone and we said it was hacked. He went to NSO Group for comment before publishing the story, and they swore up and down. They said, absolutely not. We checked everything. We checked with our clients. We looked at our infrastructure. I can tell you the Citizen Lab is wrong. We then went back a couple years later, once we had started to develop more advanced forensic techniques that allowed us to go inside a device's crash logs and look at process names that we could say definitively 100% are attributable to an infection. And what we found that at the very time that Ben Hubbard was going to NSO Group for comment, and they were saying, absolutely, we were wrong, 100%, at that very moment, his phone was being hacked again by Saudi Arabia using Pegasus. And at this time, NSO Group was pushing out this more advanced version of their spyware that requires no target interaction. Okay? The examples I've been showing you here are basically examples of NSO Group's Achilles heel at that time. They had to send out a text message, trick somebody into clicking on a link. Most of you, I'm sure, are aware now and have digital hygiene to understand I shouldn't open an attachment from somebody I don't trust, I shouldn't click on a link, and so on. Now, the latest version of the spyware, and this was the first example of it that we found, requires no victim interaction. 1 minute your phone is perfectly clean, it's fine, sitting next to you on the table. The next, it's sending data a continent away to some despot who's listening in to everything that you're doing, looking through your camera roll, and so on. Ben described it as being robbed by a ghost, which I think is an apt example. Now, why do governments spy and target journalists? I think I don't need to tell anybody in this room why. You all have very sensitive information that you're working with. You're dealing with sources that are putting their lives at risk to meet with you. You're having confidential meetings. Even when you turn your phone off, perhaps, you're meeting in a park somewhere. Autocrats, despots, dictators want to neutralize what you're doing. And that's why they want to get inside your device and find out what you're doing. Now, if you ask some of these companies, they'll push out a familiar refrain. If you're a criminal, don't be afraid. Our technology is sold to government agencies to investigate serious matters of crime, terrorism, and national security, and we do due diligence to make sure it's not abused. The big, obvious problem here, though, is who is a criminal, who is a terrorist. It's all in the eye of the beholder. For someone like Modi, a journalist, like all of you in this room, is a national security risk. Jamal Khashoggi, to Mohammed bin Salman, is a terrorist. So these definitions don't mean anything when what counts as a criminal or a terrorist is all in the eye of the beholder. And I hate to put more bad news on the table, but it's not just NSO Group that you have to worry about. Our research has showed that even at the lower end of the spectrum, there are companies like Beltrox, based in Delhi, that don't use sophisticated Israeli technology to get inside your device. They used old school cybercrime methods to trick people into getting into their email inbox and discover who they're communicating with. Maybe use that information for some kind of disinformation campaign. Their slogan, by the way, which I thought was apt, is "You desire, we do." We discovered that this one Delhi-based hack-for-hire firm was at the center of a worldwide set of seemingly unrelated victims of cyber espionage, likely hired by big corporations, their law firms or PR companies that they hire. They then go out, hire private investigators who go out and contract with one of these hack-for-hire firms. And that's just one of them. There are companies like Rayzone Group, which exploit insecurities in the telecommunications ecosystem and the mobile roaming system that we all depend on to locate any phone anywhere in the world, including all of yours right now. Or one of its sister companies, Circles, which the Citizen Lab did a report on, and we were able to identify, thanks to a mistake in their technical infrastructure, who their government clients are. And you can see here, again, it's a very disturbing picture. Imagine the security agencies of El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Thailand, Malaysia, on, being able to geolocate the phone of anywhere in the world. There's nothing you can do to defend against that because it's exploiting an insecurity in the global telecommunications ecosystem. The former owner of Circles is a company called Intellexa. And Intellexa was discovered selling surveillance gear to genocidal warlords in Sudan, thanks to investigative reporting of Lighthouse reports, Haaretz, and Inside Story. This is a perfect example of the lack of due diligence in this sector. It's almost as if they are deliberately marketing to the world's worst offenders of human rights. It's as if the market is oriented towards facilitating authoritarian repression. Here's another firm, Ability. They get the award for the creepiest slogan. While others talk, we listen. Surprise, surprise, a company that's made up of veterans of Israel's intelligence agency. There are firms like Aspectum, location tracking data, advertising-based surveillance. This is all now de rigueur in this sector. They gobble up data that is gathered by applications for commercial data surveillance, for surveillance capitalism, to build dossiers on targets and sell them to government clients. They even advertise that they can help governments assist investigations into, look here, social unrest monitoring. In the United States, thanks to, again, investigative journalists, we know that security agencies in that country now routinely purchase this type of location tracking data, all without a warrant. Consider the Israeli-based firm Group. This is an example of the market that is emerging for full-spectrum clandestine operations, traditionally the sole preserve of state intelligence agencies. This company's slogan, reality is a matter of perception, I see. And then there's the stuff of more classic vintage, deep due diligence. I wonder what that is. Honey traps, covert approaches. At the center of this company was this person, George Nader, who was involved in brokering sales for Group. He also helped organize meetings between the UAE and Trump associates, Jared Kushner, Michael Flynn, Steve Bannon, Eric Prince, wonderful crowd. This meetings became the focus of the Mueller investigations. Group eventually went insolvent, but the talent just migrates elsewhere. This is one among dozens of firms that do this sort of thing. For the ultra-rich, operating in what must seem like rarefied air, seemingly insulated from any serious risk of legal exposure by their coterie of well-paid professional advisors, undertaking these type of illicit activities has sadly become the new normal. The dark arts of espionage, sabotage, subversion, and even assassination, once entirely monopolized by governments, is now a commodity. It's become privatized. That's unprecedented in human history. Veterans of state intelligence agencies that have been trained in real life experiences of things like source management, extortion, blackmail, and psychological manipulation. Now they have turned this into a highly marketable commodity, a professional veneer provided by a glossy website, LinkedIn profile, or marketing materials, combined with bland or generic sounding services, for example, reputation management, deep background checks, can help obscure what is really at their core highly duplicitous and extremely harmful operations done on behalf of despots, oligarchs, and ultra-rich sociopaths. I think I can speak about this from some experience because we ourselves at the Citizen Lab were targeted by one of these firms, and working with Associated Press journalists, we managed to turn the tables and expose them. It turned out to be a company called Black Cube, made up of veterans of Israel's elite Mossad intelligence agency. The privatization of the Mossad. Think about that. This dramatic proliferation of privatized covert operations owes much of its magnitude to the digital communications ecosystem that we inhabit, designed to invade privacy, fundamentally insecure, from the telecommunications networks all the way up to the apps on your phone, relentlessly capitalizing on human cognitive biases and emotional tendencies, inadequately regulated, and prone to rampant abuses. This ecosystem represents the ideal breeding ground for the flourishing of covert operations. The emotional manipulation machine at the heart of social media is a near perfect vehicle for the deliberate spread of lies and distortions essential to the successful influence operation today. Truth can be easily buried in an avalanche of well-engineered falsehoods. And we're just at the beginning of this with deep fakes, artificial intelligence enabled videos, news clips, and so on. we're facing a massive tsunami as the market for disinformation for hire, industrial scale disinformation operations, and dark PR is truly exploding. Among the most effective, the ones that I worry about the most, are the seemingly amateur, slow burning, but nonetheless relentless campaigns targeting the integrity of individuals like all of you in this room. It's the disinformation equivalent of being slowly stabbed to death with toothpicks. And there's a real imbalance in the world today among organizations and entities trying to cope with this relentless assault. Governments and corporations are facing this problem. They describe it all the time. But at least they have the resources and capacities to go out and hire some firm to deal with it. For civil society, for many news organizations, especially independent news organizations, they can't withstand this assault. They barely have somebody who can plug in the printer, let alone defend themselves against adversaries that are essentially privatized Israeli intelligence agencies. Now, sadly, these cases are not exceptions, but a reflection of a new and disturbing normal. As David talked about today, I share his view. I'm really worried about where we sit right now. Government security agencies operating in an extrajudicial sphere, largely insulated from the usual mechanisms of public accountability, mercenary surveillance firms that are almost entirely unregulated, selling to the world's worst sociopaths, creating a kind of perfect storm of abuse and impunity, leading to the undermining of democratic institutions. Not surprisingly, despotism and transnational repression are spreading alongside a new normal. Now, there's an irony here. At the very same time that we're facing multiplying, accelerating, interconnected global polycrises, genuine existential risks as a human species, we are destroying our collective abilities to rationalize, to coordinate, and communicate about it. It's as if we are giving ourselves world brain damage. Now, what is to be done about all of this? Well, I do think there is some silver lining to this whole story. First of all, we need to remind ourselves that investigative reporting, responsible disclosures, and other work that we all do together here can have a huge impact. Our collaborations are definitely something to celebrate. It takes a village to bring down a dictator. And I want to give shouts out to my colleagues in this room that we've worked with at Amnesty International, at Access Now, Laurence here from Pegasus Project, many, many other people. We couldn't do the work that we do without those collaborations. And they have tangible, material impacts on your practical security. Back in November 2021, we obtained another copy of the exploits that NSO Group was using at that time to install Pegasus on a phone, in this case from a Saudi women's rights activist, Loujain Al-Hatul. We made the disclosure to Apple. They issued a security update. That was great. That protected everybody's digital security. But Apple, to our surprise, went further. They said that they were going to start notifying victims. And those notifications are kind of like they shook a tree and the fruit is falling down to victims worldwide, leading to more discoveries by us and others. They introduced a new feature called lockdown mode. How many of you who use iPhone have lockdown mode installed? One, maybe two, three, not many. I'm telling you, well, actually quite a few, that's good to see. That is the single best thing you can do right now. We have not yet observed a single spyware infection on a device that had lockdown mode enabled. We need stronger countermeasures. We need governments to do their job here. And again here, the story is actually fairly promising. In Europe, there was an inquiry into the Pegasus spyware scandal. Not a lot that the European Parliament can do on its own, but they did raise awareness about the problem. And I think that's important. In the United States, there's been some dramatic developments. President Biden issued an executive order prohibiting the federal government from purchasing mercenary spyware from firms like NSO Group that enable human rights abuses worldwide. These things have a material impact. After the US Commerce Department added NSO Group to its designated entity list, the bottom line was really impacted for NSO Group. Its valuation dropped about $500 million. That sends a strong signal to the market as a whole. It doesn't solve the problem, but it sends a strong signal. We need more of that going on. We need more legal accountability as well. It's great to see among the other initiatives that Apple took alongside WhatsApp is they've sued NSO Group in US court. That's a big deal. And they didn't hold back either. In the court ruling, this is the language they used to describe NSO Group. Amoral, 21st century mercenaries. I agree with them. Alfaro, represented by the Knight Foundation, is also suing NSO Group in US courts. Carlos Data will be on the panel, perhaps he can talk about that. These are extremely important cases. They take a long time, can also be frustrating, but NSO Group is embroiled in about 12 separate cases of litigation right now. That's thanks to the research that has exposed the abuses and provided the material evidence for those lawsuits to proceed. We need to repair the digital ecosystem. The fundamental problem at the root of a lot of the syndromes I'm describing has to do with the business model of the personal data surveillance economy. As long as we live in a world where we're treated as livestock for the data farms of these huge social media companies who push out new features without thinking about security and treat us as something to be mined and manipulated, there will always be opportunities for government security agencies and mercenary surveillance firms to piggyback off of it. We desperately need to rein in the excesses of surveillance capitalism. And lastly, we need to address and roll back the deterioration in liberal democratic institutions. The spread of authoritarianism is deeply troubling, but equally troubling for me is the extent to which liberal democratic institutions are eroding in the hearts of democracies themselves. We know about the spread of far-right populism, but the attacks on investigative journalists, on lawyers that we've observed, on democratic opposition, on people who have fled to countries like Sweden or Canada for their safety, are concerning. And this is happening at the same time that most of the security agencies in these countries, mine included, still operate in a kind of Cold War mentality. They operate in the shadows with limited or flawed accountability mechanisms. We need to push for greater oversight over our own security agencies if we can credibly stand up and say that what dictators are doing abroad is wrong. I want to thank you all. I really look forward to being here in this conference. The last thing I'm going to say to you, especially those of you who receive Apple notifications, we have a spyware checking booth. I don't know exactly what room it's in, but that's what I'm going to be doing. The rest of the time I'm here at the conference. I welcome you there. We'll check your devices and at the very least give you some reassurance and maybe some peace of mind that you're okay for now. Thank you for all of your courageous work.